It is time now to connect to Congress. It's a segment where we talk directly to Washington lawmakers about the issues that most affect the Central Valley.
And this morning we are talking with Representative of California's 4th Congressional District, Tom McClintock, live from Washington, D.C. Aside from other parts of the foothills and mountains, he also represents Mariposa, Madera, and Fresno counties. Good morning, Representative McClintock. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
The Fort Lauderdale airport shooter, he was on the FBI's radar, having been interviewed in Alaska a few months ago. And then we've got the older Tsarnaev brother in the Boston Marathon bombing, and Omar Mateen, the Orlando nightclub shooter. They were all on the FBI's radar, yet for some reason they were able to slip through, carry a gun, check it at an airport. Is the FBI really being aggressive enough at investigating these potential threats?
Well, if you look at the Fort Lauderdale shooting, they knew he was dangerously mentally ill. They turned him over to local authorities. It used to be that local authorities could confine the dangerous mentally ill and get them the treatment they needed. We used to have, 70 years ago, when the country was half the size it is today, we had 600,000 inpatient psychiatric beds available, 600,000. The population's doubled. We're now down to 40,000 because of changes in policy that were simple lunacy. And the result is we can't confine the dangerous mentally ill, and we end up with incidents like the Fort Lauderdale tragedy.
And following up on that Fort Lauderdale tragedy, you mentioned that the FBI knew about that. The other thing that really troubles me is obviously hunters and sportsmen are going to have to travel with their weapons, and there's a protocol for that. But this guy talked to the FBI, said he was hearing voices saying that he should join ISIS. They took his gun. His gun was gone for a month, and then he got his gun back. Is there any way to prevent something like that from a guy who says he's hearing voices from getting a weapon back?
Well, yes. Exactly. You confine them and you get them the mental health treatment that they need. We didn't do that. We haven't done that for years. When we were able to do that, violent attacks by the mentally ill were very, very rare. Now they've become commonplace, and the reason is the laws that have prevented us now from identifying and confining the dangerously mentally ill. They know he was dangerous. They knew he was mentally ill. They turned him over to local authorities who knew that, but the local authorities could not detain him.
All right, so what's the crack that needs to be filled? A lot of people are blaming the FBI for letting this happen. Clearly, you're saying the FBI did all it could and that local authorities did. So what is the next stopgap that needs to be taken to not let these kinds of things happen again?
Well, we know what works. That's the good news. We know how to reduce gun violence. You identify the dangerous mentally ill, confine them, and get them the help they need. You identify gun predators, and you put them in jail for very, very long periods of time. And you stop letting terrorists into the country. Those three things by itself would go a very long way and would have addressed the incident in Fort Lauderdale.
And so that's something we'll keep an eye on. Also this week we had a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz, which had to fire warning shots at other ships. We also have North Korea has indicated that it would begin ramping up its missile program, and the latest provocative actions are just on par for the course, testing a new incoming president. And should the new administration and the Congress work together to deal with these types of threats?
Well, I don't think they're testing the new president. I think that they are responding to the fecklessness of the current administration. Don't forget, just a year or so ago, 2 armed naval vessels of the American Navy were seized without their firing a shot in international shipping lanes. Why would we be surprised that the response from Iran is more and more aggressive activity? Finally, at least, we're shooting across their bow. We have a lot of experience with appeasement policies down through the decades. They are very successful at accomplishing one thing. They will always embolden your enemies. Our enemies are now emboldened. That comes to a screeching halt on January 20th.
Okay, so let's talk then about the inauguration, which is the 20th President-elect Trump. What would you like to see and hear from him at others at that inauguration to maybe be less feckless of an administration?
Well, I think he's simply going to follow through on the promises he made. What do I want to hear from President Trump? Exactly what I heard from him on the campaign trail, exactly what the American people responded to when they elected him president.
Now, before the inauguration, he's having his first press conference since winning the presidency. That's coming up about 8 o'clock this morning. He's sure to be asked questions about the Russian hacking and other situations. How are you expecting him to respond to that?
Well, it's rather interesting. It's as if this is the first time a foreign government has ever tried to weigh in on an election. The fact of the matter is Barack Obama pulled out all of the stops he had to try to influence the Israeli election and to defeat its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. More recently, he pulled out all the stops to intervene in the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom. So how come we're just shocked that foreign governments are trying to influence the vote here? I think a much more important question than whether the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee, which presumably had a number of security safeguards. I think a far more important question is, were they successful at hacking into Hillary Clinton's records, the most secret confidential information that our government held, on a server she put together solely to evade her responsibility under the Federal Information Act this business of hacking. She had less secure server than you have on your average Gmail account. I want to know how many of those secrets did the Russians obtain and what damage was done to our country.
All right, Representative Tom McClintock, thank you very much for joining us this morning and for continuing to represent the Central Valley in Washington. We appreciate your time. He's there at the Russell Rotunda. It is very busy, and you can tell there's a lot going on because right behind him and near that rotunda is where congressional hearings will be occurring today for Jeff Sessions, who President-elect Trump wants to be the next Attorney General.
And I got to say kudos, both of you. You used the word feckless in conversation, and I was very impressed by that.
Yes, you hear it once. I figured you may as well run for
Use
it
it
again.
again.
I don't know the next time we'll use it, and you have to say it very carefully.